When Chrysler rolled out the 426 Hemi in 1964, the automotive world wasn't ready for what was coming. NASCAR sure wasn't. The 426 wasn't just another V8, it was a brute, a 7.0-liter big block born for domination. At Daytona, it roared under the hoods of Plymouth Belvederes and instantly rewrote racing history. Richard Petty's number 43 Plymouth didn't just win the 1964 Daytona 500, it destroyed the field, leading 184 of 200 laps. His average speed, 154.3 miles per hour. That record-breaking run handed Plymouth a 1-2-3 finish and made the rest of Detroit sit up straight. Competitors cried foul. Ford and Chevy teams said it wasn't racing, it was annihilation. NASCAR's response? Ban the Hemi. They argued Chrysler didn't sell enough of them to the public, but everyone knew the truth. No other engine could touch it. The Hemi's hemispherical combustion chambers, a radical design for maximum airflow and efficiency, gave it an unbeatable edge. This wasn't Chrysler's first dance with hemispherical heads either. They'd experimented with the idea back in the early 50s with the firepower V8, but the 426 brought the concept to a new level. At full bore, it could produce over 500 horsepower in race trim, mind-blowing numbers for the mid-60s. On the dyno, it even pushed past that mark under controlled tests. And that was before superchargers or fancy electronics. After that Daytona win, the 426 Hemi wasn't just an engine. It told every rival in Detroit that Chrysler was done playing nice. Ford scrambled to counter with their own overhead, Cam 427, while General Motors engineers quietly went back to their drawing boards. The fear was real, and the 426's legend had only just begun. But how do you tame a race monster for the streets? That's where Chrysler's engineers found themselves in a showdown with their own creation. All right, before we keep going, if you're into cars, racing history, or just love hearing about absolute legends like the 426 Hemi, go ahead and give this video a like, and also hit subscribe to know more stories about the world's best engines ever made. After the 426 Hemi's dominance at Daytona, Chrysler faced a problem that most automakers would envy. Its race engine was too good for its own good. NASCAR's 1965 ban left Chrysler sidelined unless they could prove the Hemi wasn't just a race-only beast. The solution? Build a version ordinary people could buy. Thus, the Street Hemi project was born. In January 1965, Chrysler's product planners Bob Roger and Robert Cahill sent a letter to engineering outlining the plan. The new A102 Street Hemi would keep its twin 4-barrel carburetors and 4-bolt main bearings, but trade some of its wildness for civility. That meant lower compression, down from 12.5 to 10.25, milder cam timing, and cast-iron exhaust manifolds instead of race-grade headers. They weren't chasing comfort, they were chasing approval. By 1966, the Street Hemi rolled into Dodge and Plymouth showrooms, stuffed into cars like the Coronet, Belvedere, and Charger. Officially rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, insiders knew those numbers were conservative. In reality, dyno tests saw some engines making closer to 470 horsepower. That was insane power for a street car at the time, especially when a Hemi option could add around $900 to your car bill, nearly a third the cost of the car itself. Driving one wasn't for the faint-hearted. The Street Hemi idled rough, demanded premium fuel, and needed regular valve adjustments thanks to its solid lifters. But when it came alive, it turned every stoplight into a starting line. The massive torque meant even a heavy Dodge Charger could smoke its rear tires at will. And while some magazines complained about finicky tuning, a properly dialed-in Hemi could run a quarter mile in the low 13 seconds, outrunning almost anything wearing a factory badge. For Chrysler, the gamble worked. NASCAR let the Hemi back in for 1966, and Detroit's streets gained a new menace. The same engine that terrified the racing world was now rumbling down Main Street, daring anyone to challenge it. But Chrysler wasn't stopping there, because once the Hemi hit the streets, it was only a matter of time before it took over the drag strip too. Once Chrysler's engineers unleashed the Street Hemi, it didn't take long for racers to realize that what ruled NASCAR could just as easily own the quarter mile. The Hemi wasn't designed for polite weekend cruising. It was born to eat asphalt in 1,320-foot bursts. Practically overnight, the 426 Hemi became the engine of choice for drag racers who wanted to rewrite what fast meant. By 1966, Chrysler had begun supplying purpose-built Hemi cars straight from the factory for superstock racing. We're talking about machines like the Dodge Dart Hemi SS and Plymouth Barracuda Hemi SS, lightweight rockets built for one thing only: domination. These cars ditched creature comforts entirely. No back seats, no insulation, even the windows were thin plastic. Under the hood sat the same 426 cubic inch elephant engine, tweaked for maximum output. Officially, Chrysler claimed 425 horsepower, but racers laughed at that number. In reality, they were pushing well north of 500 horsepower, sometimes even more depending on tuning. The Hemi's secret weapon wasn't just raw power, it was how efficiently it used it. The hemispherical combustion chambers created a cleaner, faster burn, allowing the engine to breathe freely at high RPM. This meant more horsepower, better throttle response, and the kind of acceleration that made crowds cheer and rivals sweat. Cars like the Ram Chargers and the Golden Commandos became legends at the drag strip, routinely breaking into the 10 and 11-second ranges, times that were flat-out ridiculous for the 1960s. By the early 70s, Hemi-powered machines had evolved into the monsters of the NHRA Top Fuel and Funny Car classes. These beasts, still based on the 426 design, were producing over 11,000 horsepower on nitromethane and hitting 300 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. Even today, that fundamental Hemi layout is still at the heart of those record-breaking engines. The drag strip made the Hemi immortal. It proved that Chrysler hadn't just built an engine, they'd built a dynasty of power. And while it was tearing up the drag world, Detroit's other automakers were scrambling for answers because, on the streets, the Hemi was about to start another war. When the 426 Hemi roared onto American streets, it didn't just make noise, it started a full-blown arms race in Detroit. Ford, Chevrolet, and Pontiac had already been dabbling in performance, but Chrysler's Elephant engine changed the game completely. Suddenly, the horsepower numbers everyone was so proud of looked small. The Hemi wasn't just faster, it was meaner, louder, and more unapologetically wild than anything else rolling off an assembly line. By 1968, muscle cars were the hottest thing in America. Ford had the 428 Cobra Jet, Chevrolet had the 427L 88, and Pontiac was pushing the Ram Air 4. But none of them carried the same mystique as a Hemi badge. Mopar fans knew the difference immediately. If your hood bulged with those twin scoops and a subtle 426 Hemi emblem, you weren't just another muscle car guy, you were driving something that could humble almost anything on 4 wheels. The numbers spoke for themselves. 425 horsepower, 490 pound-feet of torque, and quarter-mile times in the low 13 seconds. That was serious business for a car you could drive off a dealership lot. Models like the Dodge Charger, Plymouth GTX, and Roadrunner became street legends overnight. The Super Bee and the Cuda pushed the intimidation factor even higher, with looks that screamed aggression and an engine note that made windows tremble. But Chrysler wasn't selling these cars to everyone. The Hemi option cost nearly $1,000, and with that came frequent maintenance, rough idling, and abysmal gas mileage. Most buyers stuck with cheaper 383s or 440, but for those few who checked the 426 Hemi box, they got the closest thing to a race car ever sold for the street. Rival automakers threw everything they had at Chrysler: bigger engines, lighter bodies, wilder camshafts, but none of it truly dethroned the Hemi. It wasn't just an engine anymore. It had become a symbol of dominance. And as Detroit's horsepower battle reached its boiling point, Chrysler took the fight to the next level by transforming the Hemi into a technological masterpiece that looked straight into the future. The real secret behind the 426 Hemi's dominance wasn't just brute force, it was brilliance in engineering. Chrysler's engineers in the early 1960s were under crushing pressure to beat Ford and Chevy in NASCAR, and they didn't have the luxury of time. Yet within a year, they created one of the most advanced V8 engines Detroit had ever seen. The Hemi nickname came from its hemispherical combustion chambers, perfect domes that allowed air and fuel to flow more efficiently, burn cleaner, and create unmatched power. Each cylinder had 2 huge valves set at opposite angles, allowing for a straighter air path. That meant bigger explosions, more horsepower, and a ferocious roar that no wedge-head engine could match. The Hemi's 10.25-to-1 compression ratio for the street version and a wild 12.5-to-1 for the racing version gave it an almost unfair advantage on both track and street. And that massive 426 cubic inch displacement, equal to 7.0 liters, earned it the nickname the Elephant. At around 843 pounds, it was as heavy as it was unstoppable. Even the carburation setup was exotic. Two Carter 4-barrel carbs sat in line on a high-rise intake manifold, gulping down over 1,200 cubic feet of air per minute. The result? A thunderous 425 horsepower at 5,000 RPM and 490 pound-feet of torque at 4,000. On a good day, the race-prepped version could crank out 500 horsepower, numbers that were borderline terrifying for the 1960s. But building it wasn't easy. Engineers had to redesign the block for extra strength, cross-bolt the main bearings, and test each prototype to the limits on dynos that simulated entire races. They ran these engines at full throttle for hours, tweaking every cam profile and valve spring until it could withstand the brutal demands of NASCAR's 500-mile marathons. Chrysler didn't just want to compete, they wanted to dominate. And when that Hemi went from the test cell to the track, Detroit's top dogs realized this was a revolution. Next, we'll see how Chrysler turned that revolutionary design into an unstoppable force on the racetrack, rewriting motorsport history one checkered flag at a time. Once Chrysler unleashed the 426 Hemi, racing would never be the same. The engine debuted at the 1964 Daytona 500, and what happened next sent shockwaves through Detroit. Plymouths driven by Richard Petty, Jimmy Pardue, and Paul Goldsmith finished first, second, and third. Another Hemi-powered Dodge took fifth. They didn't just win, they humiliated the field. Petty alone dominated so completely that year he was nicknamed the King, a title he'd never lose. The 426 Hemi had rewritten the rules of NASCAR overnight. At Daytona, Petty's Hemi-powered Plymouth averaged 154.33 miles per hour, a record at the time. Competitors couldn't keep up, and NASCAR wasn't amused. By 1965, officials banned the engine, claiming it wasn't available in production cars. Chrysler's response? Fine, we'll make it street legal. That's how the Street Hemi was born, bringing racing power straight to dealerships by 1966. In drag racing, the Hemi's legend grew even faster. Don Big Daddy Garlits found that by tweaking the ignition timing, he could squeeze out even more power. That discovery catapulted fuel dragsters into the low 6-second quarter-mile range, nearly a second and a half faster than before. The Hemi's power was so intense that its aluminum racing versions became the go-to engine for top fuel dragsters and funny cars for decades. Even cars wearing Ford or Chevy logos often had a Hemi hiding under the hood. Drivers like Bobby Isaac and Buddy Baker also cemented the Hemi's legend in NASCAR. Isaac's 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona grabbed 20 pole positions and 11 wins in one season, a record that stood for years. Baker became the first driver to break 200 miles per hour on a closed course, driving a Hemi-powered Daytona at Talladega in 1970. Those moments defined an era when Mopar was unstoppable and rivals were scrambling for answers. And this had every lap, every win, every record push the competition further behind. Next, we'll take this fire-breathing monster off the track and see what happened when Chrysler dropped it into street cars that anyone, at least anyone with cash and courage, could own. When Chrysler took the 426 Hemi from the racetrack to the showroom floor, Detroit didn't know whether to cheer or panic. The Street Hemi, as it was called, was basically a detuned race engine made barely tame enough for public roads. Released in 1966, it powered Mopar icons like the Dodge Charger, Plymouth GTX, and later the Cuda and Roadrunner. For about $900 extra, roughly a third the price of a whole car, you could get the same 426 cubic inch monster that tore up Daytona. It made 425 horsepower at 5,000 RPM and 490 pound-feet of torque, figures that still raise eyebrows today. But those numbers only told half the story. A properly tuned Hemi could easily push past 450 horsepower, and many mechanics whispered it was underrated on purpose, so insurance companies wouldn't go into shock. Owning one, though, wasn't for the faint-hearted. The Hemi's solid lifters demanded regular adjustments, and it idled like a caged animal. Cold starts were rough, and maintenance was constant. But once it came alive, once that twin-carb setup gulped air and fuel, it transformed a quiet neighborhood into a war zone of sound. The Hemi wasn't a cruiser, it was a challenge, one that only the bold accepted. From 1966 to 1971, fewer than 11,000 street Hemis were built. They powered everything from the Charger RT and Super B to the rare 71 Hemi Cuda convertible, one of which sold for $3.5 million in 2014. Even a standard Hemi Charger now commands six figures. Chrysler's engineers didn't just build engines, they built legends. Of course, those cars came with more than just power. They needed reinforced suspensions, special brakes, and the strongest axles Chrysler could make. Each one rolled off the line as if it had something to prove. And it did. Next, we'll see how the unstoppable rise of the Hemi pushed Detroit and NASCAR itself to the breaking point, forcing a showdown that would change racing forever. By the late 60s, the 426 Hemi wasn't just an engine, it was a problem. NASCAR officials, rival automakers, and even government regulators were all starting to feel its impact. The Hemi's dominance had grown so absolute that it began reshaping rules, production plans, and even corporate strategies across Detroit. After Chrysler's NASCAR boycott in 1965, officials tried to rein things in. They demanded smaller displacement limits, under 405 cubic inches, to curb the Hemi's reign. Chrysler answered with the A117, a short-stroke 404 cubic inch version that still managed to win 4 straight races with Richard Petty at the wheel. It was clear, even when Chrysler played by the new rules, the Hemi still crushed the competition. NASCAR had no choice but to let the full 426 back in for 1966. But the street market was shifting. Emissions laws, insurance hikes, and gas concerns were tightening their grip. The Hemi wasn't just too powerful, it was too demanding. Each car that left the factory cost Chrysler more to build than it sold for. They had to strengthen suspensions. By the end of the 1960s, the 426 Hemi wasn't just winning races. It was rewriting the balance of power in American performance. But domination has a price. Chrysler's Elephant engine had so thoroughly crushed the competition that NASCAR regulators and rival automakers all started closing in. The Hemi had forced Detroit to the edge of what was politically and mechanically acceptable. After Chrysler's 1965 boycott, NASCAR tried to regain control of its own sport. Officials limited displacement to 405 cubic inches, effectively outlawing the full-sized Hemi again. Chrysler responded with the 404 cubic inch A117 variant, still a monster, and Richard Petty promptly won 4 races in a row. NASCAR had to cave, letting the 426 back in for 1966. The message was clear. You could tweak the rules, but you couldn't stop the Hemi. Meanwhile, on the streets, the landscape was shifting. Insurance companies were cracking down on high-horsepower cars, and new emissions standards were looming. The Hemi was everything regulators hated: loud, thirsty, and built for speed over sensibility. Its 425 horsepower rating came with 10.25 to 1 compression, twin 4 barrels, and a thirst for premium fuel. Even Chrysler engineers admitted it was never a normal engine. The maintenance was demanding, and production was expensive. Each Hemi car had upgraded brakes, suspension, and driveline parts, pushing costs higher than Chrysler could justify. Still, it stayed on the streets through 1971, roaring in Chargers, Roadrunners, GTXs, and Cudas. But under the hood, the writing was on the wall. Emissions regulations were tightening, unleaded gas was arriving, and corporate leaders feared backlash for selling race cars for the road. When the 1972 models arrived, the Hemi was gone. What Chrysler had built was too raw, too pure, and too powerful for an industry turning toward economy and regulation. The Hemi had proven Detroit could build near perfection, but perfection didn't fit the new rules. By the early 70s, the 426 Hemi had run its course. NASCAR rules, street regulations, and rising costs finally forced Chrysler to retire the beast from production, but its legend would never fade. So in the end, which part of the 426 Hemi story did you like the most? The Daytona domination, the street legal fury, or the drag strip takeover? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and hit subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Thanks for watching.